Serious rural folk, what is the most creepy thing you've seen or experienced? I live in rural Wisconsin. Surrounded by corn, marsh. The works. I remember I was in my teens. Outside at dusk with my parents, but we were all doing our own thing. Suddenly a woman's voice yells help me from the woods beside our house. Just loud enough to hear, but quiet enough for me to second guess what I heard. My mom and dad both turned to look at me like you heard that too right. Mom starts screaming do you need help, where are you it's moved from dusk to pitch black now and the hair stood up on my neck because it got too quiet. Mom wanted to keep yelling. But dad just got up from his chair and said inside. I think that's one of the only times I've seen her listen to him. Dark foggy early morning, walking alone on an unpaved little road through some woods. I see something coming out of the fog. A grown man skipping like a little schoolgirl. When he sees me he stops. I do not make eye contact. It was the janitor at my school. A bit late to this thread, but I've never had an opportunity to share this story. My wife and I met in a small rural town on Lake Superior, and when we were ready to move in together, we purchased a remote cabin about 40 minutes out of town. It was an incredibly idyllic and peaceful existence for 2 years when we decided it was time to move closer to family. We had packed all of our items, except for 2 mason jars we had used for celebratory glasses of wine on our last night. When we woke up the next morning both glasses were destroyed throughout our dining room. It was not like a normal fall with pieces of glass on the floor. There were shards in other rooms. On windowsills 10 feet away from the table. And some pieces of glass were ground into a fine powder. I cannot think of a logical explanation of what happened. Whatever would have created the force to do that damage to the glasses would have woken us up. I am absolutely at a loss of what happened and still think about it frequently all these years later. Sheep cough like people. I learned this during the pitch black 30-minute walk home from the nearest pub. When I was a child, 2 of my friends and I decided to explore around an abandoned house that was down the road from us. Typical abandoned house look paint peeling off everywhere with exposed wood in some spots. Plants vines overgrown, broken windows, roof tools missing here and there. Well we walked inside and it matched the outside. Cupboards broken, floorboards splintered and cracked. Other than the place being extremely empty. We didn't really get any scary vibes from it. Nothing really stood out to us as paranormal as we'd expect. So we leave the house mildly disappointed. We're walking alongside of one of the windows when this very well-dressed, well-groomed man, maybe in his 60s wearing a black dress coat, white shirt and black tie comes into view. We didn't see him inside, never heard anything. Yet here was this man just staring at us blankly through the window. Friends and I booked it as fast as we ever ran out of there and back home. It probably was just one of the property owners that just happened to be inside the same day we were. There were a few rooms we didn't go in, but good God, that scared the shit out of us lol. A few years later the local fire department burnt the place down in a controlled burn, so if it was paranormal. Welp it's gone now lol. I was in northern Wisconsin with my family as a kid. While I was up there I went on a little hike with my brother and dad. Just sorta going through some woods. Ended up emerging from them onto someone's property, and the dude there saw us. Came up with his kid and asked the obvious what you doing on my property. My dad just apologized and said we were hiking and that he shouldn't have been so careless. We went back quickly and while the encounter was odd it didn't feel tense or anything. My brother and I also learned a good lesson about respecting private property. However, dude we encountered was apparently not satisfied. I get it to some degree. If I lived outside an urban area I'd be sus too if someone emerges from the forest onto my property. Things got weird though. The guy we encountered actually got some goon who either worked for or was related to him to track us back to our cabin. About 5 minutes after we got back and started to make lunch this goon literally waltzes inside the cabin and begins to talk about how we were caught trespassing. He wasn't yelling or angry or anything, but it was still pretty jarring having some camo-wearing guy that you've never seen before to just barge into your grandparents' house. He didn't have a lot of time to say much because our grandparents owned a few guns, mostly antiques though, and sure enough one got pulled on him. Our grandma held this guy up and actually apologized again for the prior instance of trespassing. Then she started to yell at him though for following us. Trespassing on our property and straight up coming inside uninvited, and then he left. Was a really weird encounter. I've talked to my dad and brother about it on occasion, though so it wasn't a dream or my imagination. Either way, don't trespass. That's the lesson I learned. Edit, a lot of people are speculating that we stumbled on drugs or something, and tbh I find that unlikely. The guy that talked to my dad gave his name, I certainly don't remember it though, and again had his own son with him. I think it's more likely we pissed off someone who values property and privacy, and they overreacted greatly. Regardless, as others have noted, if you find yourself in a similar situation remain polite. Apologize. And tfo. The blood-curdling scream of something being killed by coyotes. Then all of a sudden it stops and there's dead silence. Just a few weeks ago just had a black snake wrapped on my outside doorknob when I opened it. I guess it was trying to get to the nest of flycatchers beneath the porch roof. Australia has a reputation for scary animals, but people don't ever talk about the sounds you hear. The cutest, most fluffy, sweet-faced little animals make demon noises in the dark. Our birds scream. Awesome sound horror movie noises. Koalas sound like giant monsters. All of these are completely harmless. Generally the dangerous animals are, coincidentally, the ones you can't hear. I used to live 30 minutes away from where I am now in the Philippines. And back then there weren't any convenience stores or supermarkets nearby in my village. It was just all grass, trees, and vines, perfect if you want to hide mutilated or sacked bodies. One day, my parents and I drove home from my preschool. Suddenly my dad went silent and told me not to look. He was stupid enough to disobey. And saw someone hanging from the trees with their neck. We learned later on that people were killing themselves because of destitution and personal conflict. We used to live in rural Philippines in a tiny fishing village in Tinambacan. Right next to our house was a fenced-off lot that had been overgrown and a really broken-down house. It always looked really creepy at night and kids in the neighborhood told me it was haunted. From our rooftop you could look into the lot. One night I was looking at it. And I saw a strange blue glow coming from inside and shadows moving across the windows. I couldn't place it at all and didn't hear any noise. No people speaking or any indication of what was causing it. Really scared me. I brought it up to my family and they told me drag queens were squatting there overnight so that they could attend a nearby disco. So, that was relieving. My grandparents' cottage is in Turkish Mediterranean region and it lies in lemon and orange trees. We have 2 close neighbors and other settlements are quite far. And the 2 neighbors aren't present since it's summer and they moved to uplands which is cooler. Now, the cottage is old, really old. It was built on a large rock and it has no toilets inside. Toilet is about 20 meters outside in the south like Shrek's. Well, I had to use it in the middle of the night and there is no light. I had to navigate using moonlight and there's no light in the toilet either. You wouldn't know what's inside until your eyes gets used to the dark. When I was in, I heard footsteps or something crawling outside because dry grass was making noise. Whatever it is. Approach to the door and stand there for solid 20 minutes. Now since where I stayed was way secluded and the closest town was 1 hour of driving. And in the fields we have seen wild boars, snakes and wild dogs too. I stayed in there for an hour after the animal left and rushed out to home, but my legs were asleep. Crawled until I could walk again. I was 12 or 13 at that time. A friend of mine lived in a semi-rural area growing up. One night the cops knocked on her door and warned her that they were looking for a possibly violent fugitive. Told her they'd check her property and that she should lock up and be wary. It wasn't until some time later that she found out the full story. The fugitive had been caught sexually assaulting a horse in a local stable. In the ensuing panic, the horse's leg was broken and the man got away. He was found 2 days later hiding in a stormwater drain. My family lives in an old farmhouse. Surrounded by a lake, field and forest. No neighbors nearby. No reason for outsiders being near, it's a dead-end road. This happened to my aunt when she was dog-sitting. She wakes up in the middle of the night to some noises. Our dog was less than helpful guard dog and she didn't alert her at all. Aunt sees several people outside with flashlights. Walking around the yard. She panics and immediately puts on all the lights and the people escape. She called the cops, but it would have taken them an hour to get there. Nothing was taken, but sure scared the hell out of my aunt. Grew up in a very rural area of Kentucky on a property that was about 75 combined acres of woods and empty fields out a dead end. 1-lane road. One night when I was a kid I was sent to take the trash out to the dumpster after dark. The dumpster was already at the bottom of the driveway. About the time I reached the dumpster I heard the most blood-curdling scream I have ever heard. Like a woman was being brutally murdered right in my ear. I flew back to the house and had a full-on come apart, crying and telling my dad to get a gun. Hawk screams will make your blood run cold. Live out in the country, realized one night that we never got the mail that day, so I walked out to the road to get it. No moon that night, so it was pitch black, just the sound of crickets and tree frogs. As I'm walking back up the driveway, I hear my husband whistling. From the direction it's coming from it seems he walked out the back door and was coming around the side of the house towards me. I didn't know why and didn't bother to ask. I just went up on the porch and back in the front door. Just then my husband came out of the bathroom. I still get freaked out a little when I think about it. It was 100% a human whistling a tune and both humans were in the house. I lived way out in the country when I was 15 years old. So way out, it would take us an hour to the closest grocery store and it would take the cops 45 minutes to get to our house. No neighbors close by. If something happened, no one would hear you scream. One night, I got a gut feeling in my stomach that something wasn't right. I ignored it and went to sleep, thinking it was just anxiety. Then, I wake up to a blood-curdling scream at 2 in the morning. I was absolutely terrified. These screams were demonic, switching between a high-pitched screech of a woman to a growl of a man. My entire family woke up. And my stepdad got his shotgun. My stepdad went outside. Mind you, this is the country, and there are no street lights. It is pitch black other than the porch light above us. The screaming and screeching continues. It sounds like two people. My sister had gone out with her boyfriend earlier that day and still hadn't returned. Based off the screaming, my mom thought my sister was being murdered in the woods by her then boyfriend. My mom started screaming, "Jason, fake name. Jason, you let go of her. Get your hands off her. Where are you?" Then it goes absolutely silent. We're so scared thinking she's dead and he's coming for us next. Then another noise begins. And it's the voice of a man demon. He yells, "I am Jacob. I am the son of God. I am chosen to find the baby. Only I can make this passage. Only I can find this baby in Valine." Now we're really scared thinking my sister's boyfriend is part of a cult and going to kill us all. My mom finally calls the police. All the while this person is screeching and howling and creeping closer and closer to our house. After about 30 minutes of this, we finally see the outline of person in our field of vision. Right next to our car. My stepdad shoots near. Yells, "Don't you get any closer now." Person creeps closer. Stepdad shoots closer. "Now don't make me kill you," he yells. But that second shot we hear the person run back up the woods. And we wait for the police to arrive. Finally, after 45 minutes, the police car comes through and shines light on the perpetrator. We cannot believe what we see. It is a skinny, completely naked, shaved head man, crawling on all fours like a gorilla. Or like Gollum from LOTR. If that's easier to picture. The police grab him screeching and howling the entire time. The cops didn't even come down to explain what was happening. They just took off, and we had to go back to sleep like nothing happened. The next day, we have to call the police to find out what happened and who this was. Apparently this was one of our neighbors, who was a repeat drug offender. Our neighbor mixed a bunch of drugs together and tripped out a little too hard. It was actually unfortunate to hear he succumbed to his addictions a couple of years later. He was very young. This was a terrifying night, and for those that don't live in the country, this is the true horrors we have to face. Unemployment, drug and alcohol addictions, and domestic abuse. These issues can run rampant in rural areas, and I hope our areas will get better one day. The LDRA demon man showed up screeching at our house in the country. He stated he was the son of God and came to find a baby. Police arrive. It was a man all tripped out on many different substances. We need to be more aware of the drug problem in rural areas. My uncle used live way out in the country on a plot he said was a little less than 8 acres. His closest neighbors weren't terribly far away, within quick driving distance, but also just far enough that walking wasn't very viable anyways. I spent my 8th grade summer there, and he had one story that scared the shit out of me back then. He had an array of animals on the farm, 3 hunting dogs, pigeons, dozens of chickens, other various birds, a few goats and a lone horse, and every night he would make his rounds through his farm just to make sure everybody was where they were supposed to be and that everything was locked up. One night as he's walking back to his house, his dogs start going wild. He initially doesn't give care to it and continues on his way, but his dogs are just relentlessly barking. He points his flashlight around and doesn't see anything. He gets to the back door of his house, his dog still barking, and so he turns around one last time. Way out in his fields he says he does see what looks like a moving shadow. He automatically assumes it's a coyote or some other wild animal and just goes inside. The next night as he goes out to make his rounds, he said he was immediately stopped as he spotted some sort of shadowy figure just a little distance away from his barn. He didn't say anything, but he did take out his gun. Again, his initial thought was maybe a coyote trying to get his chickens. However, as he took a few steps, he said the figure suddenly stood up, almost human-like, and ran into the field, covered in darkness. He said he was so startled he just froze for a moment before yelling out, "Hey!" He didn't give chase to whatever or whoever it was. He did say that for about a week after. His dogs would go ballistic at night, but he never saw the figure again. When he was telling me the story, he said that it probably could have just been a transient, but I don't know. The dude lived in the middle of nowhere and had to drive like 40 minutes to shop. Seems incredibly bizarre for some random homeless to even be in that area. He said it could have also been a black bear, but I don't know either. He wasn't even close to the kind of area I would think black bears inhabit. Dude lived in a rural country farming area, not anywhere remotely close to mountains, forests, etc. Something else that happened in rural Co. This is my friend's story. Dress rehearsal for our school play would run a little late sometimes. My friend ended up being one of the last people there. She walked to her car and got in. Something in her rearview mirror caught her eye. She looked through her back window to see that a mountain lion was a few yards away. It wasn't the first instance of a mountain lion being on the school grounds. The middle school was just down the hill from there. And I remember when it locked down because there was a mountain lion outside. But all nature lol. Edit. This is a horribly violent incident. Read at your own risk, not seen or experienced. I was at my village 6 or something months back. I don't live there, so I don't know anybody other than a couple houses next to mine. One afternoon. We were supposed to clean the rice, it was a relative's wedding, and we had to supply for the food, to be cooked ourselves, and I was helping too. I understand the local dialect, though I can't speak it well enough. There were aunts, grandmas, sisters and all the women available. They started gossiping about an incident happening in the house next to theirs. The incident was a young girl about 20, was so brutally beat up by her own brother, in front of the crowd of folks. Not by hand, not by stick, but a giant ass frame of a bed and something metal. Then he had pinned her to the ground in a chokehold until she was unconscious. Her mother was there were men, there were adults. Nobody did anything. She was later admitted in the hospital with broken ribs and a couple more severe injuries. All because she answered to her brother rudely, not exactly rude, but kind of back-answered, or I think she said no to something he had demanded. I'm not sure people didn't do anything, just watched the whole show, and excused the fucking monster, saying he was probably possessed or he is not like that. He had heard about this incident 2 days after this happened. When I talked to my grandma about it, or asked her to file a complaint, she said, "That is not our matter, we don't poke our noses in someone else's houses, no matter how criminally offensive that is." That was the most shocking thing I have heard. I live in a fairly rural part of New Jersey surrounded by forest and hills. One night in high school, my friends and I were driving down one of the local backroads to find a place to chill and smoke. As we're driving, a deer jumps out in front of the car, as they normally do. This time though, as we slowed down, the deer turned around back the way it came, walked up to a tree, and then proceeded to bash its head in on the tree in one hit and fall dead. It didn't run into the tree, it walked over and then slammed its head into it. It was the weirdest behavior we've ever seen. Could have been rabies, but was really freaky. Unsettled all of us, and we decided to go back and smoke at my friend's house. Also fox screams. Holy hell, does it sound like murder. Got stalked by a lone wolf for a few months. That was great, never once aggressive to me, though, but he was big. I live on southeast side of a lake in northern Ontario. In the winter when the lake freezes, wolves come across the lake from the northwest, usually in packs, and hunt the local wildlife, mostly rabbits I think, which are abundant. Well, one year I guess one wolf didn't make it back across the lake before it melted. We had an early spring thaw, and he was around for the summer. There's no streetlights on my road, and my friend lives about 1 kilometer up the road from me. After work we'd go to their place for beers almost daily, to be honest, then I'd just walk home after. For weeks I felt like I was being followed, stalked. I'd turn around quick and point my flashlight, and once or twice I got a quick glimpse of yellow eyes. At that point I never seen one here in the summer. In the winter, yeah, going for a rip on a sled, sometimes you catch a glimpse in the distance. Anyways, one night after weeks of this happening, I borrowed a trail cam off of a MNR guy we do service work for, put it on the road not far from my buddy's place. After a few days I pick it up, and sure fucking enough there was a big black fucking timber wolf following behind me by like 1 to 2 men every night. This really freaked me out, but I had solace knowing that, if it wanted to attack me, it probably would have already. All the same, I started driving to my buddy's place instead of hoping a ride and walking back, until one night I had far more than my usual 2x after work beers. I say fuck it. Grab a flashlight out of my truck and start to walk instead of drinking and driving. I'm walking, there's maybe a 3/4 moon behind me coming through the trees. It's light enough for me to see without my flashlight, and I have it off, as per the norm. I'm about halfway home. I don't see him at first, and it was fast in my mind. All of a sudden his eyes got lit up by the moon behind me. The wolf was walking on the opposite side of the road, walking in my direction 15 to 20 feet in front of me. I don't know what the hell made me say it, but I just kept walking and just said, "Yo," as we passed, and the wolf kind of just grunted and carried on. Every year since then there has been a lot less rabbits in our area. I'm guessing he cleared out a lot of the population that summer. Depending on the beholder. This is a ballsy or stupid story I can throw in the mix of all these close animal encounters on here. I lived out of a camper shell I built on the back of a small Japanese pickup I own. Did this with some breaks of couch surfing in between for about 5 months, east to west coast and lots of places in between. I was doing some work on a guy's house in Sonora, California. He and his family were the coolest of Mormons, and they actually offered that I just park anywhere I like on their 8 acres of property until we got their house finished up to be put on the market. Having a stable campsite, I changed things up and would sleep in my hammock beside my truck. Weather was perfect that time of year. The guy's wife saw me in my hammock on the first morning and made it a point to tell me about the 2 goats they had lost to a mountain lion the year prior. One day at dusk while I was there, she and her son got a mountain lion walking up the driveway on video. It was back. I knew the risk, but figured it's far too scared of human smells and lights and sounds to ever realistically mean problems for me, which is the case for 99% of those cats. Just be noisy before bed and you're set. After lights out at night, I'd sit and browse the web for a while in the cab of my truck, and I could charge my electronics from the inverter I had in there. I wasn't done going in and out of the camper shell in the bed of my truck, so I had left both tailgate and hatch wide open. It was well into the night. I'm just reading away, and all of a sudden my entire truck lurches from a dip in the rear end. Something's in the back of my truck. I've shuttled people around back there, and I have a good sense of how the rear leaf springs do underweight in this truck because I've owned it for so long, and it was as if a slightly less than or equal to 200-pound man plopped his ass on my tailgate. Oh shit. First thought is it's a person. Didn't think it at the time, but there is no way it's a person. Them parked on crushed gravel that gives away the approach of anything putting body weight on it. Unless this person was being intentionally sneaky. But that gets thrown to the wind with the jump onto the tailgate. So it wasn't a dude. A useless wide-eyed check of my mirrors sent me thinking of a better plan. I'm not getting out of the cab. Manually lock both doors. Old truck, my keys are already on accessory to run charging, so less than an eighth of a turn of the key and the truck is running. I rev the thing in accordance with my heart rate, but I don't blast the horn because I don't want to wake this family and their 5 young kids up. Plan works and the truck springs back up unweighted. The noise did scare the cat. But a mountain lion, at night, it'd pounce into the back of my truck. I shut the truck off and waited things out a good while. All clear. The ballsy stupid part comes now. I was 21. This was my adventure I had dreamed about since I was a kid. I don't have wild behaviors, but I honestly feel all but dead inside until I face some kind of challenge or adversity and I'll come alive. Grew up watching too many movies or something. All my favorites share the common theme. Anyway, I didn't want to back down. Slight dehydration was on my side, and I knew my piss was going to smell a little stronger because of it. I pissed all over the trees my hammock was strapped to, and underneath and in a little sea bear circle around the hammock itself. And I did that every night for the next 2 weeks with no problem until we finished the job. It was ballsy then. But it's stupid now. The reality though is that anyone who sleeps outdoors in their habitat for any amount of days more than 1 out of the year has slept in a mountain lion's territory. Likely under 1. In terms of hillside, not trees. The consensus around them is that they see you, you don't see them. Could have told that story so much shorter. But it's true and storytelling is a lot of fun. This ass turned into RL campfire stories quick. Grew up spending a ton of time in the Colorado Rockies. In college a friend and I were on a weekend backpacking trip up in national forest land, about 300 yards off trail. When we stumbled across a mostly buried bunker someone had made. Think a 20-foot long tough shed, buried up to its roof. We only noticed it because sun glinted off one of 2 small windows in the roof, which had been deliberately covered with brush tree litter. Looking through the windows, we could make out a cot, buckets and tubs of food and supplies, etc. Found the door, concealed partially buried, which had a heavy padlock securing it. Noped out of there with a quickness, didn't want to run into whoever had built the place. I used to live in the desert for a year, and on nights when the moon isn't out, or there are clouds blocking out the stars and moon, it's almost pitch black, you can't see more than 10 yards ahead of you. One night I was driving down the highway going home, and then suddenly in my headlights, I see a guy running on the side of the highway full on sprinting. I'm going 70 miles per hour so it's only for a second or two, but I'm like what the hell was he running from? I hope he's okay because I'm not pulling over Lamau, but then maybe a minute later I see another guy in my headlights only he's walking on the side of the highway. And I swear to God it looked like the same guy. 2 separate guys in the dark walking running on the side of the highway. What possible reason could explain that? I didn't see any cars on the side of the road that might have broken down. I was so weirded out I just had an uncomfortable feeling the entire ride home. People assume living in the country is quiet and peaceful. It's peaceful. But rarely quiet. A pack of coyotes howling can sound like crying babies. I know what it is, but it still freaks me out when I'm home alone at night. My brother and I were home alone watching TV. He had an inflatable, life-size Stone Cold wrestler in the basement. When you punched it, it would pop back up and say things like "'Cause Stone Cold says so." So we're watching TV. And we know it's just us at home when suddenly we hear "'Cause Stone Cold says so" coming from the basement. Very creepy since the thing wouldn't talk on its own. Something had to have moved it, and we were home alone. We both just looked at each other and ran downstairs to see what was happening. My dog had stone cold horizontal by the waist, and poor stone cold was rapidly deflating. Water from the bottom weight dripping into the carpet like clear, white blood. My dog's eyes were glazed over from the glory of the kill, and he'd periodically give Stone Cold another shake for good measure. You see, my brother had been chasing my dog with Stone Cold for about 2 weeks, and my dog was very afraid of this inflatable man. I only wish I'd seen him working up the nerve to approach and kill him. Rip inflatable Stone Cold.